my fellow readers. My name is Greg, and this is Ghost Readers in the Sky. Today I'm reviewing a book from 1962, a book by Rachel Carson. It's called Silent Spring. It's one of those books that everybody knows about, but I'm not sure how many people have read it now. Was widely read in the early 1960s when it first came out. Rachel Carson was a marine biologist primarily. She was born in Pennsylvania near the Allegheny River in 1907 and died at the age of 56 in 1964, just a couple of years after Silent Spring came out. She got her bachelor's degree in biology at what is now Chatham University and her master's in zoology from Johns Hopkins. And she went to work early for a precursor of what's now the Fish and Wildlife Service, the federal government. I think it was called the Bureau of Fisheries. And she started off as a communication specialist. I don't know what her job title was exactly. Her first big assignment was to write radio programs about sea life. These were 7-minute radio programs. They aired once a week, and she wrote all 52 of those. And from there, she just continued to write a lot of brochures and papers and essays for the Bureau of Fisheries. She ended up supervising a group of writers. And in 1941, she wrote her first full-length book called Under the Sea Wind. That was followed up 10 years later, 1951, by the book that really brought her to national attention. It's called The Sea Around Us, and it won the National Book Award for nonfiction, but this is where she really became known. When that book came out, there was a republication of her first book, and then she wrote a third one about the sea. This is sometimes referred to as her Sea Trilogy. Third one was 1955, called The Edge of the Sea. And with those 3 books, she made enough money that she was able to leave the federal government and just start writing full-time. And so much of what she did from the mid-50s on was work on Silent Spring. Silent Spring is about the rise of chemicals in agriculture and forestry and the unintended consequences and the detrimental effects that these chemicals have. And she used her communication skills to really make this accessible to average people who may have had some science background but did not understand in depth all of the science. There had been a lot of studies going on, thousands of studies, but they were all done by government scientists or universities and done all around the world and published in many different languages. She was able to distill all of that and really showed she was a great science communicator. I can't think of anybody before that who was as good. The closest we have today is probably a Neil deGrasse Tyson or a Brian Cox. She certainly was a bestseller. All of her sea books were bestsellers. Silent Spring was a bestseller. It was published again in paperback, bestseller. And she starts off by talking about a fabled town where wildlife starts disappearing It's not a specific town, it's just what could happen. And all of the things have happened in one town or another. In 1962, they'd already happened to some town somewhere in the U.S. Then she goes and starts explaining about the chemistry, just enough for us to know. So the reader doesn't have to understand organic or inorganic chemistry, doesn't have to understand the workings of biological systems, but she sets it out. DDT was the big focus of the book, and the first half or so of the book is about DDT and its related chemicals. DDT was developed by the military in 1945 and started being used as a pesticide soon after the Second World War ended. And while it could be a very effective pesticide, it didn't just kill those pests. So some of the big unintended consequences that she talks about are spraying elm trees for the parasite that causes Dutch elm disease. And the spraying got into the soil, and the earthworms, as they were working through the soil like earthworms do, they ingested the DDT and stored it, and they weren't affected directly, but then the robins came, ate the earthworms, and all the robins died. So yes, you control the pest for Dutch elm disease, but you kill all of the robins. All of them. All of them. Same thing happened in streams and forests where they sprayed for gypsy moth, I think, originally, but for in forest for a forest pest that they had, they just did aerial spraying, and a lot of that got into streams and killed all the trout. There was some spraying along coastlines for mosquitoes, and it killed everything except the snails. Snails, which were hosts for liver flukes, which then got in a lot of trouble. So these are the kinds of stories she tells. She kind of focuses on one biome at a time. So she has a chapter about streams and one about forests and one about the oceans and so on, and gives us the ideas about how the chemicals work and why DDT in particular and similar chemicals just rise up through the food chain. She goes from there into the detrimental effects of pesticides on people who are exposed to them. So originally, the people who are actually handling the chemicals or producing the chemicals in warehouses, and they would get skin cancer and all kinds of had a lot of other problems, lung cancer. She actually devotes quite a bit of time to cancer and how it's not really a disease. It's just that the cells are impacted so that they do not develop as they should. And it can be caused by a lot of things, but certainly pesticide use is one. She provides anecdotes from newspapers and essays and scientific studies about, for example, a housewife who was afraid of spiders and so sprayed her basement thoroughly to kill spiders with DDT or something similar, and ended up having convulsions, and then she recovered, and then she sprayed again, and then she had the convulsions again. She also talks about the impact as the buildup happens from year to year, from exposure to exposure. Also gets into some of cell biology and what we were learning about how the cells work, how chromosomes work. A lot was known about how genetic traits were passed on, but the idea of chromosomes and how those worked was new in 1962. And so she explains that. Just did an amazing job with bringing science to regular people. This is from the first chapter, and a lot of these chapters have illustrations. The illustrations were done by a husband and wife team, Lois and Louis Darling. I love those names. But they have a lot of illustrations. These were the original illustrations from 1962. There's even in this particular book, we have, we have this photo. Let's see if I can get that. Yeah. Photo of Lois and Louis Darling. They did the illustrations, and I think that is just one more thing that made this book accessible. The way Carson broke this down in chapters, you could just read a single chapter and get a lot out of it. I think it works better as an entire book. But if you just want to understand what happened in streams and forests, you can just read that chapter. If you want to understand the effects of pesticides on cancer, you can just read that chapter. So it's broken down very well. And then she has, while she doesn't go deep into the science, I just wanted to show you, so the notes, here are the principal sources. This starts on page 259, and it goes to page 317. So this much of the book, so 50 pages, all of this is notes. All of this is just notes from scientific studies, from journals, from correspondence she had with scientists, with people in the government, with people who are concerned in the community, from people like the Audubon Society and others. Just an amazing amount of research, but not doing the studies herself, just grabbing all of this data from all of these multiple sources. And then she's able to talk about the government agencies who were setting the limits for what could and couldn't be sprayed, and the fighting that happened between the various agencies, where one group might want to limit the spraying and another one wants to make it more. How the government would sometimes look at just one particular group of constituents, like cattle ranchers or like almond tree farmers. And the chemical industry certainly had a lot of power. What we now think about in the big ag, big pharma, they had power back then, and they were influencing government in 1962 just like they do today. And in fact, when Silent Spring was released, the chemical industry, particularly in the US, fought really hard against it, put out a disinformation campaign, and really tried to discredit Rachel Carson and discredit the research. But there was just so much that piled up. After the book came out and after it made such an impact, it got regular people riled up. And I think that's where the key to the success of this book happens, is Rachel Carson presents the information and does say, this is bad and we need to stop it, and we need to we need to take care of pests, but there are a lot of ways we could do it without using DDT, which kills every ding-dang thing in the world. And it got community groups active. It got local, Audubon societies and those, bird watching groups and other animal-related groups really started campaigns with local and state and federal governments to make changes. And there did become a nationwide ban on DDT and similar chemicals, more regulation around chemicals like 2,4-D, which is still in use today. Which also, we got the agency that became the Environmental Protection Agency that came out of the response to this book. So a lot of good things happened. Probably not enough, because we still have many of these same problems. And then she talks about resistance to pesticides that various species have gotten. I think we hear more about it with medicine and people who take antibiotics when they don't need antibiotics, and help encourage super strains of bacteria that are immune to the effects of antibiotics. And she talks a lot about how that has happened. She also talks about what's just barely getting started. I think we would call it today integrated pest management. That's what I'm familiar. That's the term I'm more familiar with. But where you use biological solutions rather than chemical solutions. So bring in predators, bring in ladybugs to eat aphids to stop when you have too many aphids. Those kinds of things. They were starting to figure out how to synthesize pheromones to build pheromone traps. They were figuring out how to sterilize mosquitoes so that the males were sterile, and so the females, even though they were laying eggs, they didn't get fertilized. So she used that as the path forward. And we do see some of that today, but we still see mosquito control boards where they are still trying to eradicate mosquitoes. She talks about why eradication is usually a bad idea, because it creates an imbalance. A lot of what she talks about is the thinking about systems. Chemical companies do a lot of their testing on, does DDT kill gypsy moths? And it does. And they say this is how much it takes, and this is how many parts per million per acre, and the chemical company puts that out with that advisory. But they don't test anything else. So what effect does this have on the trees and plant life? What effect does it have on the other animals in the forest? What impact does it have in the streams and the fish and the trout? It's being tested for one thing, and only one thing, instead of a larger, more systemic test, and not even done in small batches, but having a spraying of hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of acres, including in places like Yellowstone National Park, and just lots of problems come around. I was going to show you a couple other photographs. This is a good one here from an interview that she did with Eric Severide from CBS Reports. This is 1963. So here she is being interviewed by Eric Severide. So a very famous journalist of that time period. This would have been watched by millions of people. Does it say? Yeah, they figure it was watched by 10 to 11 million people, this interview. This is the photo that was done when she was profiled in Life magazine. But there she is from her Life magazine feature. 1962 as well. So just an amazing person and an amazing book. I do want to read just a little bit. This is the beginning of the second chapter. It's called The Obligation to Endure. The history of life on Earth has been a history of interaction between living things and their surroundings. To a large extent, the physical form and habits of the Earth's vegetation and animal life have been molded by the environment. Considering the whole span of earthly time, the opposite effect in which life actually modifies its surroundings has been relatively short. Only within the moment of time represented by the present century, so it's the 20th century, has one species, man, has acquired significant power to alter the nature of the world. And she goes on to talk about how in a very short time frame, humans have modified the world in amazingly fast ways. We humans have made massive changes that the environment just can't keep up with in order to keep any kind of balance. And so it's up to us, if we're going to change the environment, it's up to us to do what we can to keep a balance. I think that's really the crux of this book. I really enjoyed reading this book. In some ways, it's a bit depressing and agitating, because a lot of the same problems that Rachel Carson wrote about in 1962 are still happening today in 2025. But there's also a lot of hope. We have made changes when just regular people decide to band together and demand change. Change happens. But it did take a sustained campaign from just regular people to make changes. And that has to continue if we want to continue to see change. So certainly if you're interested in the environment, this is a great book to read. It is a classic of environmental writing. If you are interested in the history of environmental studies or agriculture or forestry and what was going on in the early to mid 20th century, this is worth reading. So if you're interested in any of those subjects, definitely pick up Silent Spring. I think it's really interesting to compare 1962 to 2025 and see what's the same, what's different, what changes are there, and how those words written 60 some odd years ago can still relate to us. Thanks for watching. This has been a more in-depth review than what I've normally done, but I'm thinking I may do more of these, if that's okay with you. Till next time, my name is Greg, and this is Ghost Readers in the Sky.